bank teller told me she loved meeting my baby the other day. I have no kids. Think you've got me mixed up with someone else, I said. She apologized and I forgot about it until dinner. Funny thing at the bank today, I told Ben. The teller asked about my baby. His fork clattered to his plate and his eyes widened slightly. What did you tell her? He asked, not looking at me. Just that she was confused, I said. But Ben's reaction was bizarre. He excused himself saying he felt sick and went to bed at 7:30. Something felt wrong, so I logged into our savings account on my laptop. That's when I found a series of $5,000 withdrawals, twice a week, for 6 months. $87,000 missing from our savings, all withdrawn from the branch near Ben's office during lunch hours. The date started 13 months before, and I sat there trying to think what had changed around that time. Ben had started working late more often, said they had a new project. He'd missed my sister's wedding because of a work emergency. He'd been protective of his phone, taking calls in the garage. Then it hit me like a physical blow. The bank teller had confused me with someone who looked like me, someone Ben had brought to the bank while I wasn't there, someone with a baby. Ben's coworker Lisa looked enough like me that people at the Christmas party had joked we could be sisters. Lisa, who Ben drove to prenatal appointments because her car kept breaking down. Lisa, who had her baby 4 months ago, whose baby shower Ben attended while I was in Boston. My hands shook as I did the math. 13 months of withdrawals matching exactly when Lisa got pregnant. You have a baby with Lisa, I said when Ben came downstairs the next morning. He stopped in the doorway, then walked to the coffee maker without saying anything. $87,000, Ben. You stole our savings for Lisa's baby. He poured his coffee slowly, then turned around. His name is Jackson. He's 4 months old. Just like that. No denial, no excuse, just admission. I sat there trying to process that my husband had a baby with another woman while we'd been married for 5 years. He explained it all so casually, like he was discussing the weather. Lisa had gotten pregnant by accident, but when it happened, he'd realized he wanted to be a father. He claimed I never wanted kids, which wasn't true at all. I'd said I wanted to wait until we bought a house, and that money he'd stolen was supposed to be for our house on Maple Street, the one we'd picked out together. Ben pulled out his phone and showed me a picture like he was proud of it. Lisa holding a baby, both of them smiling. I was going to wait to tell you until after our anniversary trip, he said. Give you one last nice week to remember, but I guess this works too. Lisa wants to move in soon anyway. When I asked where, he said here, obviously, because this place was perfect for a baby with 3 bedrooms. My mind went blank as he pulled papers from his briefcase and explained how he'd taken my name off the deed 3 months ago when I'd signed what I thought were insurance papers. The timeline became sickeningly clear as he admitted everything. That weekend in Vegas for my birthday when he'd supposedly missed his flight, he'd been at the hospital for Jackson's birth. The money had gone to everything from prenatal care to a $12,000 nursery with a convertible crib that would grow with his son. The stroller alone had cost $3,000. Top of the line, everything for a baby I didn't know existed while I'd been working overtime to save for our future. He'd already filed for divorce 2 months ago, and Lisa's lawyer friend had expedited everything so it would be final next month. When I asked about our 5 years of marriage, about what would happen to me, Ben paused at the door with his briefcase. Lisa didn't need convincing about having kids, he said. She was excited from day one, never complained about the timing or money or buying a house first. Every conversation we'd ever had about waiting, about being responsible, about planning properly, he'd been holding against me. He checked his watch and announced he had to take Jackson to his 4-month pediatrician appointment. Pack your things today, he said. Lisa wants to paint your office yellow for the nursery. When I asked him why he was giving her my office, Ben looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, like I was a stranger inconveniencing him. Jackson needs a proper nursery with the window facing east for morning light. I told him he couldn't just evict me, but my voice sounded weak and we both knew it. Ben pulled out his phone and showed me a photo that made my stomach turn. Him in a hospital room holding a newborn, wearing a hospital bracelet that said, Daddy. The locks were being changed at noon, and he'd already moved my things to the garage while I'd been sleeping. I stood up, but my legs felt shaky as I asked where I was supposed to go, what I was supposed to do. He opened the door and looked back one last time. What are you going to do about it? He asked, then left me standing in what used to be my kitchen. The door clicked shut, and I just stood there like my feet were glued to the floor. My brain kept playing his words on repeat, while the coffee maker gurgled and the morning sun made patterns on the counter. 10 minutes passed according to the microwave clock before I could even move. The locks were changing at noon, and it was already past 8. I grabbed my laptop from the counter, and my hands shook so bad I could barely type the password. The bank website loaded, and I started taking screenshots of everything. Every single withdrawal going back 13 months. Every $5,000 transfer. Every date and timestamp. I created a new Gmail account right there and emailed everything to myself and to the new address. The systematic clicking and saving gave me something to focus on, besides the fact that my whole life was falling apart. I pulled up the county recorder website next and searched our address. There it was in black and white. My name crossed out with a line through it dated 3 months ago. The signature on the removal form looked exactly like mine, but I knew I never signed anything like that. Those papers Ben had me sign in March when he said we needed to update our insurance. He'd rushed me through them during dinner saying the agent needed them back that night. My stomach turned as I realized what I'd actually signed. The clock showed 9:30 and I forced myself to move. I ran upstairs and grabbed the photo albums from the closet shelf. My grandmother's jewelry box from the dresser. The locksmith van pulled up outside at 11:25 and I tried my key one more time. It still worked, but the guy was already walking up the driveway with his toolbox. He wouldn't look at me as he started drilling out the lock. I grabbed more things from the living room while he worked. Picture frames from the mantle, the quilt my mom made for our wedding. The guy kept his head down like he knew exactly what was happening. I carried everything to my car and called the police from the driver's seat. The dispatcher listened to my explanation about being illegally evicted from my own home. She transferred me to an officer who said it was a civil matter since Ben's name was on the deed. The most they could do was stand by while I got my belongings, but since I was already getting them, there was nothing to do. The legal system wouldn't help me today, or probably any day. I went back to the garage where Ben had dumped my stuff in boxes and plastic bags. That's when I found the folder sitting on top of a box marked Office. Insurance updates written in Ben's handwriting across the tab. I opened it and saw all the papers from March. Every page had a notary stamp and signature. Jaime Luna from the title company near Ben's office. The same Jaime who came to our Christmas party last year. Everything had been planned, so carefully with people I thought were our friends. I took pictures of every single page with my phone. The deed transfer form, the quitclaim document, forms I didn't even understand, but my signature was on all of them. I emailed these to both email accounts too, and my phone storage warning popped up. I deleted old photos to make room and kept taking pictures of everything I could find. Bank statements he'd left in a box. Credit card bills showing charges I'd never seen. Hotel receipts from when he was supposedly at conferences. Everything went into my phone and then to the cloud. My sister picked up on the second ring when I called her. She heard something in my voice immediately, and I told her I needed somewhere to stay. She said she was leaving work right now and would be at her apartment waiting. Just having somewhere to go tonight made me feel like I might survive this. I started loading my car with whatever would fit from the garage. My clothes stuffed in garbage bags. Important documents from the filing cabinet. My work laptop and monitor. Kitchen stuff I'd bought before we got married with my own money. Each box felt like I was erased from this house. The locksmith finished at noon exactly, and I watched him hand the new keys to nobody since Ben wasn't even there. He just left them under the mat and drove away. I was pulling out of the driveway when my phone buzzed with a text from Ben. A list of rules typed out like a contract. Don't contact Lisa at her home or work. Don't show up at his office. Don't spread lies about him to mutual friends. Don't post anything on social media. Any violation would result in legal action for harassment and defamation. He'd already consulted a lawyer about restraining orders if necessary. The last line made my anger finally break through the shock. Your sister has been notified that you may try to manipulate her for sympathy. I wonder what made the bank teller so sure she'd met this exact person with a baby. That's oddly specific for a simple mix-up. Ben's reaction to drop his fork seems way too dramatic for someone who's been planning this whole thing for months. He'd already started poisoning my relationships while I was still processing what happened. My sister picked me up 20 minutes later and found me sitting on the front steps with 2 suitcases and 3 garbage bags of clothes. She took one look at my face and loaded everything into her car without asking questions. The drive to her apartment took 40 minutes and I stared out the window watching houses pass by. Her place was small with just 1 bedroom, but she set up the couch with sheets and a pillow. That evening while she made dinner, I opened her laptop and searched for divorce lawyers in our area. Page after page of results came up and I clicked through dozens of websites looking for someone who could help. Most of them talked about simple divorces and custody agreements. But then I found Graham Reeves. His website said he specialized in financial fraud cases and had 20 years of experience with forged documents. I left a message on his answering service asking for an emergency meeting and gave my sister's number. The next morning, I woke up at 6 and couldn't go back to sleep. My sister had already left for work, so I took her spare car keys and drove to the bank branch near Ben's office. The same teller from before was working, and when she saw me, her face lit up. She started to say something about the baby, but then stopped when she saw my expression. Her smile faded and she looked confused as I walked up to her window. I asked if she remembered seeing me here with Ben and a baby. She nodded slowly and said she'd seen us several times over the past few months. Her voice got quieter as she explained that Ben had introduced me as his wife and the baby was so cute. I thanked her and walked back to the car where I sat for 20 minutes just staring at the steering wheel. My hands were shaking and I couldn't catch my breath as everything hit me at once. Tears came hard and fast until I was sobbing so loud that people walking by turned to look. After what felt like forever, I wiped my face with some napkins from the glove box. Ben had planned everything so carefully, but I could plan too. I could document every single thing he'd done and use it against him. Walking back into the bank, I asked to speak with the manager about my account. A woman named Noelle Warner came out and brought me to her office. I explained about the withdrawals and showed her the printouts I'd made. She pulled up the account on her computer and scrolled through the transactions with a frown. Since Ben's name was on the account, she said the withdrawals were technically legal, but she helped me freeze what was left and remove his access immediately. We set up alerts so I'd know about any activity, and she gave me forms for a fraud report. Then she helped me open a new account in just my name with a different account number. I called my job's HR department from her office and changed my direct deposit right away. Noelle suggested I check my credit report for any other accounts Ben might have opened. She seemed genuinely sorry about what happened, but kept saying her hands were tied by regulations. That night back at my sister's apartment, I pulled my credit report online. Every line made my stomach twist as I searched for surprises. 2 credit cards showed up that I'd never seen before and both were maxed out. One had $8,000 and the other had $6,000 in charges. The dates went back several months with purchases at baby stores and restaurants. At least there weren't any other loans or accounts, but $14,000 in debt felt like another punch. The next morning, I called the county recorder's office about the house deed. A man named Warren Wilkerson answered and listened as I explained what happened. He found the deed transfer from 3 months ago and emailed me a copy while we talked. The document had my signature, but I knew I'd never signed it. Warren mentioned that the notary was someone named Jaime Luna, who worked at a title company downtown. He gave me her number and I called right away, but got voicemail. Later that afternoon, Jaime called back and I asked about the deed signing. She remembered it vaguely and said Ben had come in alone with the papers. He told her I was in a rush and couldn't make it in person. When I mentioned the word fraud, her voice changed completely and she got defensive. She said everything looked legal and she'd done nothing wrong, then hung up quickly. But the way she rushed off the phone told me she knew something wasn't right. The next day, I made myself go to a clinic for STI testing. The nurse at the desk was professional, but I felt my face burning as I explained why I needed it. She took me back to an exam room where another nurse drew blood and did other tests. The whole thing took less than an hour but felt like the longest morning of my life. Taking control of my health was something I could do even if everything else was falling apart. 3 days later, Graham Reeves called back and we scheduled a meeting for that afternoon. His office was in an old building downtown with dark wood furniture and law books on every wall. I brought all my documents in a folder and spread them across his desk. He looked through everything carefully and took notes on a yellow pad. The forged deed was criminal, he said, but proving it would take time and money. We could file for divorce based on dissipation of marital assets, which meant Ben had wasted our money. Graham explained that I might get temporary support while the divorce went through. He'd request an emergency hearing to get me back in the house since the deed was probably fake. We talked about getting Ben to admit to the forgery in writing or recorded somehow. Graham said he'd seen cases like this before where one spouse planned everything in secret. The key was documenting everything and staying calm even when I wanted to scream. That night, I went back to my sister's place and pulled out every single receipt, credit card statement, and calendar entry from the past year. I spread them across her dining room table and started matching dates with a red pen. Every work emergency lined up with something else entirely. The conference in Chicago happened the same week Lisa posted about morning sickness on Facebook. The weekend training in Denver matched her baby shower date perfectly. The Vegas trip for my birthday overlapped exactly with Jackson's birth certificate date that I found online. My hands shook as I circled date after date, the pattern becoming so clear I couldn't believe I'd missed it. 2 days later, Graham called to say he'd arranged a civil standby so I could get more of my things from the house. The officer met us there and stood in the doorway while I went inside. Ben wasn't home, but the changes hit me immediately. The guest room had been turned into a full nursery with pale yellow walls and safari animals painted near the ceiling. The $3,000 stroller sat in the corner next to the convertible crib I'd seen online for $2,500. Designer baby clothes hung in the closet with tags still on them. A rocking chair that cost more than my car payment sat by the window. Every piece of furniture, every toy, every tiny outfit had been bought with money I'd saved by skipping lunches and working overtime. I took photos of everything while the officer watched, my hands steady even though something inside me felt broken. That night at my sister's place, I couldn't sleep and just stared at the ceiling for hours. Every sign I'd missed played through my mind on repeat. The way Ben had started doing his own laundry, the new cologne he'd started wearing, the gym membership he'd suddenly needed. My sister found me in the kitchen at 3 in the morning and made us both tea without saying anything at first. She sat across from me and reminded me that trusting my husband wasn't stupid or naive. The betrayal was completely on Ben, not on me for believing in our marriage. Over the next few days, notices started arriving at my sister's address. The electric company, water company, gas company, all transferring service out of my name. Ben was erasing me from the house one utility at a time. Each notice felt like another cut, but I forwarded them all to Graham's office. He said Ben was creating a perfect paper trail of his plan to remove me from the property. While packing a box from the garage during another civil standby, I found our old tablet shoved behind some paint cans. It still had Ben's photo account synced to it, and hundreds of pictures started downloading. There were dozens from the hospital when Jackson was born. Ben holding the baby, Ben cutting the cord, Ben and Lisa smiling together like a happy family. The timestamps showed April 15th at 2 in the morning while I'd been home thinking he was stuck in Vegas. More photos showed them at doctor appointments, at a park, at what looked like Lisa's apartment. I screenshot everything and emailed them to Graham immediately. I spent the next 3 days organizing every piece of evidence into a comprehensive package. Bank statements with highlighted withdrawals, photos with timestamps proving Ben's lies, text messages I'd found on the tablet, the forged deed documents, calendar entries showing the pattern of deception. Graham looked through everything and said it was one of the most documented cases of marital fraud he'd ever seen. My need to understand what happened had created an ironclad paper trail. Then Ben's lawyer sent an email claiming I was planning to defame Ben and demanding I cease all false allegations immediately. Graham actually laughed when he read it and pointed out that Ben had just admitted in writing that he knew I was building a case. We saved it as more evidence of his consciousness of guilt. Graham filed the paperwork for emergency temporary support and an injunction to stop Ben from disposing of any more marital assets. He also filed something called a lice pendens on the house, which would prevent Ben from selling it while the divorce was pending. Graham Reeves specializing in financial fraud cases seems pretty convenient timing. Makes me wonder if there's something about this lawyer that drew her to his website specifically. The bank teller remembering them several times feels oddly specific too, like she's keeping careful track of customers and their babies for some reason. Finally, I was taking legal action instead of just reacting to what Ben did. The court scheduled our first hearing for 3 weeks out, which felt like forever. Graham explained that the legal system moved slowly but thoroughly, and we needed to be patient. The waiting was agony, but at least the process had started, and Ben would have to answer for what he'd done. Meanwhile, I got a complete export of our joint account history going back 2 years. The memo lines told the whole story without Ben even trying to hide it. Baby crib from Pottery Barn, pediatrician payment for Jackson, prenatal vitamins, nursery furniture, payments to L with heart emojis next to them, $50 cash withdrawals every few days that probably went to Lisa for expenses. Ben hadn't even tried to hide it in the transaction details because he'd been so sure I'd never look. His arrogance in thinking I was too trusting or too stupid to check made my anger burn steadier and more focused than before. I called the bank the next morning and asked for the teller who'd mentioned my baby. The manager said she couldn't give out employee information, but I explained it was about a fraud case, and she put me through to Noelle, who agreed to meet at a coffee shop after her shift ended at 3. I spent the morning organizing every piece of evidence I'd found, printing bank statements and highlighting each withdrawal, creating a timeline that showed exactly when Ben had started stealing from us. At the coffee shop, Noelle looked nervous, but she sat down and told me she'd been thinking about our conversation since yesterday. She said Ben and Lisa had been coming to the bank together for over a year, always during lunch hours, always with cash deposits and withdrawals. The baby had been with them at least a dozen times in the past 4 months, and Lisa would hold him while Ben handled the transactions. Noelle remembered because they'd joke about Jackson being their little financial advisor and how he'd need his own account soon. She couldn't make an official statement yet because she was worried about her job, but she said she'd think about it and gave me her phone number in case I needed anything else. Her confirmation that this had been happening for months made everything real in a way that the bank statements hadn't. 2 days later, I was at the grocery store picking up milk when I turned the corner and nearly ran my cart into Lisa, who was standing there with Jackson in her arms. She saw me, and instead of walking away, she actually came toward me with this smile on her face like we were old friends. Jackson was wearing a tiny outfit that probably cost more than my weekly groceries, and Lisa shifted him to her other hip as she stopped right in front of me. She said everything had happened naturally between her and Ben, that it was meant to be, that some people just connected on a deeper level. She told me Ben had never been happy with someone who didn't want children right away, that he'd talked about how I kept putting it off and making excuses about money and houses and timing. The whole time she was talking, Jackson was making baby noises and reaching for her necklace, this real living proof of what they'd done behind my back. I walked away without saying anything, but her words stuck in my head, confirming she'd been part of this plan all along, not some innocent woman who'd accidentally gotten pregnant. Graham called that afternoon, and I drove to his office where he explained our legal strategy in detail. He said we could challenge the deed transfer as fraud in the inducement since Ben had tricked me into signing it by telling me it was insurance paperwork. The legal terms made sense as he explained them, showing me case examples where spouses had successfully gotten property transfers reversed when they'd been deceived about what they were signing. He said it was a strong case but would take months to work through the courts, and we'd need to document everything including Ben's pattern of deception. Every document I'd found would help prove Ben had been planning this for over a year, and Graham made copies of everything for our files. The next day, I went to the post office to set up mail forwarding from the house to my sister's apartment. The clerk handed me a stack of mail that had been held, and when I got back to my sister's place, I found bills I'd never seen before. There was a storage unit rental that had been active for 8 months, charging $70 monthly to our credit card, a second car lease for a BMW that cost $800 a month, supposedly for Ben's work, but the dates showed he'd gotten it right when Lisa got pregnant. Monthly payments to a furniture store for items I'd never seen, probably for Lisa's apartment, or maybe already moved into our house. Graham said each new bill strengthened our dissipation claim, since it showed Ben had been spending marital assets on his affair and hidden life. That evening, I remembered our shared Google Calendar and logged in on my laptop. I went back 13 months and started checking the revision history on old events. There were pediatrician appointments that had been added then deleted, but the version history showed everything including the exact times Ben had made the changes. He'd scheduled Jackson's newborn checkup 2 weeks before telling me about the baby, his 2-month shots while I was at a work conference, his 4-month appointment just 3 days ago. The premeditation was clear in every deleted calendar entry, showing he'd been planning Jackson's medical care while still pretending our marriage was normal. I made screenshots of everything and emailed them to Graham, who responded within minutes saying this was exactly the kind of evidence that would help our case. My company offered an employee assistance program that included financial counseling, so I made an appointment for the next morning. The counselor pulled up my pay stubs and helped me create a budget for living on just my income. We figured out that if I got the temporary support Graham was requesting, I could afford a small apartment and basic expenses. Having actual numbers and a plan made me feel less like I was drowning and more like I could survive this. My sister spent that evening writing a detailed statement about Ben missing her wedding 14 months ago. She included screenshots of text messages where Ben had claimed a work emergency that couldn't wait, and messages where I defended him to our family, saying his job was demanding and he felt terrible about missing it. She wrote about how he'd promised to make it up to her but never did, and how the dates lined up perfectly with Lisa's pregnancy timeline that we'd figured out from the bank records. 3 days later, Noelle called to tell me Ben had tried to access the frozen account that afternoon. She said he'd gotten angry when she explained the freeze was court-ordered, and he couldn't withdraw anything without legal documentation. She'd added extra security notes to the account, and documented his attempt in their system, which would create an official record of him trying to violate the court order. His anger at losing control of the money gave me a small bit of satisfaction after everything he'd taken from me. The next morning, my sister called to say Ben was downstairs trying to get into her her building. She refused to buzz him in and told him through the intercom that she'd call the police if he didn't leave. A neighbor came out to walk their dog, and Ben apparently didn't want to cause a scene, so he left after standing there for another 5 minutes. My sister watched from her window as he drove away in the BMW I'd just learned about, probably heading back to Lisa and Jackson in what used to be my house. That afternoon, Lisa emailed me directly with the subject line, "For Jackson's sake," and I could tell from the first sentence that she was trying to manipulate the situation. She wrote about wanting peace between what she called Jackson's families, and said he deserved to grow up without conflict or anger. She made it sound like I was the one causing problems by fighting the divorce and freezing the accounts, like I was disrupting their perfect little family that they'd built on the foundation of my marriage. Graham told me not to respond, and forwarded it to his assistant to save as evidence of her involvement in the whole scheme. 2 days later, Graham called me into his office and showed me a document he'd just filed with the county clerk. He explained that a Ellis Pendens was basically a warning sign on the house title that would stop Ben from selling or refinancing without settling our divorce first. The filing took less than an hour, but within 3 hours, Ben's lawyer was on the phone screaming at Graham about it. Graham put him on speaker while I sat there listening to the man rant about how we were being unreasonable and vindictive. Graham just kept saying the same thing over and over, that we were protecting marital assets according to state law. The call ended with Ben's lawyer slamming down the phone so hard it made the speaker crackle. 3 weeks passed before our first hearing date arrived, and I wore my only suit that still fit after losing 20 pounds from stress. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick. Ben sat at the other table wearing his expensive gray suit and didn't look at me once during the entire hearing. His lawyer argued that I was being difficult and refusing to accept reasonable terms, while Graham laid out our case about the missing money and forged deed. The judge was an older woman with reading glasses on a chain who kept flipping through our documents and asking Ben's lawyer pointed questions. She granted me temporary support of $2,000 a month, which wasn't what we'd asked for, but was better than nothing. She didn't order Ben out of the house yet, saying she needed more evidence about the deed forgery before making that decision. The timeline of Jackson's medical appointments hidden in those deleted calendar entries makes me wonder if Ben actually thought nobody would ever check the version history. His pattern of scheduling doctor visits during her work trips suggests he knew exactly how wrong this. When Ben's lawyer claimed I knew about the withdrawals the whole time, she looked at him over her glasses and said that seemed unlikely given the evidence. After the hearing, I went back to my sister's couch where I'd been sleeping for 2 months and started looking for apartments online. The temporary support meant I could finally afford something small, and after viewing 12 places, I found a studio on the 3rd floor of an old building downtown. It was tiny with just one room plus a bathroom, and the only window faced a brick wall 10 feet away. The landlord wanted first and last month's rent, which ate up most of my first support payment, but I signed the lease anyway. Moving in took one trip since I only had 2 suitcases of clothes and a few boxes my sister had saved from the house. I bought an air mattress at Target and a folding table from a thrift store, and that was my entire furniture collection. Having my own space even this small made me feel like I could breathe for the first time in months. Graham started preparing me for the dissipation hearing by running through mock questions in his conference room. He'd play Ben's lawyer and grill me about dates and amounts while teaching me to answer with just facts and no emotion. We spent 6 hours over 3 sessions practicing until I could recite the timeline of withdrawals without hesitation. He kept telling me my documentation was exceptional and that the bank records spoke for themselves, but I still felt sick thinking about facing Ben in court again. Meanwhile, Graham had subpoenaed the bank teller who'd mentioned seeing Ben with the baby, and she agreed to testify. She was nervous when she came to Graham's office for prep and kept asking if she'd get in trouble for talking about customer business. Graham assured her she was just telling the truth about what she'd witnessed, and that the subpoena protected her from any backlash. She confirmed she'd seen Ben at least 4 times with Lisa and the baby during the exact time periods when the big withdrawals happened. 2 weeks before the hearing, Ben's lawyer sent over a settlement offer that Graham called insulting. They were offering me $20,000 total if I dropped all claims to the house and agreed to a quick divorce with no further financial demands. Graham said the lowball offer showed they were worried about the dissipation hearing because $20,000 didn't even cover a quarter of what Ben had stolen. I told Graham to reject it immediately and said I wanted to proceed to the hearing no matter what happened. The $20,000 wouldn't even cover what Ben took, let alone my share of the house we'd bought together with my inheritance money as the down payment. Graham sent back a 1-sentence response that we'd see them at the hearing. The morning of the dissipation hearing, I threw up twice from nerves and had to redo my makeup in the courthouse bathroom. The courtroom was the same one as before, but this time it was just the judge and a court reporter besides us and Ben's team. Graham presented everything methodically, starting with the bank records showing every $5,000 withdrawal. He had them blown up on poster boards, so the pattern was obvious even from across the room. The photos from Ben's phone that we'd gotten in Discovery showed him at the hospital with Jackson wearing the daddy bracelet. The calendar entries proved he'd lied about work trips that matched up with Lisa's prenatal appointments and the baby's birth. Then the bank teller took the stand and described seeing Ben with Lisa and a baby multiple times during banking hours. Ben's lawyer tried to argue that I must have known about everything, but the judge kept asking him for evidence of that knowledge. When it was my turn to testify, Graham had me stick to exactly what we'd practiced, just dates and facts and amounts with no emotional commentary. The judge asked me directly if I'd known about the withdrawals or the baby, and I said no to both. Ben's lawyer tried to trip me up with questions about our finances, but I had every answer ready thanks to Graham's preparation. The judge took a 20-minute recess to review everything, then came back with her ruling. She found that Ben had dissipated marital assets by taking $87,000 without my knowledge or consent for non-marital purposes. He would have to account for the full amount at the final divorce trial, and she increased my temporary support to $3,000 a month. She said the forged deed claim had merit, but she'd rule on the house at the final trial after more investigation. Ben's face turned red, and he started to say something, but his lawyer grabbed his arm to shut him up. After everyone left, I sat alone in my studio apartment on my air mattress, feeling completely drained, but somehow lighter than I'd felt in months. The judge had seen through Ben's lies and validated that what he'd done was wrong and illegal. For the first time since finding those withdrawals, I felt like justice might actually be possible, even if it would take more fighting to get there. 3 weeks later, I sat in a small office across from a therapist. My insurance finally approved after multiple phone calls and forms. She had me describe everything that happened, and I went through it all again. The bank, the withdrawals, the baby, the house theft, everything. She asked how I felt about myself now, and I told her I kept wondering what I did wrong to make Ben choose Lisa over me. She stopped me right there and explained that Ben's choices weren't about me being lacking in any way, but about his own selfishness and need for control. We spent the rest of the hour working through how his manipulation tactics had made me doubt myself when really he was just a liar who wanted everything his way. The next week, the court ordered Ben to let me retrieve my personal belongings from the house with a police escort present. I arrived with 2 officers and found boxes in the garage labeled with my name, but when I opened them, half my stuff was missing. My college yearbooks were gone, along with the jewelry box my grandmother gave me, and all my photo albums from before I met Ben. The officer asked if I wanted to file a report, but I knew it would just be more court dates, and Ben would claim he never saw those things. I loaded what was left into my car while Ben stood in the doorway holding Jackson and watching with this smug look on his face. That night, I went through every account I had and changed all the passwords to random strings of letters and numbers that I wrote in a notebook. I set up two-factor authentication on my email, bank accounts, social media, everything that offered it. I checked my credit report and found Ben had tried to open a credit card in my name 2 weeks ago, but got denied because I'd already frozen my credit. My sister invited the whole family over for dinner that weekend to show support, but some relatives had opinions I didn't ask for. My aunt kept saying I should forgive Ben for my own peace of mind, and my uncle suggested maybe I pushed Ben away by being too focused on my career. I finally told them that unless they'd had their spouse steal their house and have a secret baby, they didn't get to tell me how to feel about it. Graham called me the next day to work on my impact statement for the final divorce proceedings in 2 months. We sat in his office for 3 hours going through everything: the financial fraud, the emotional manipulation, the theft of my home, the destruction of my belongings. He helped me write it all down in clear, factual language that showed the judge exactly what Ben had done without sounding vengeful or bitter. 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, but I recognized Ben's new phone immediately when I saw the photo of Jackson at 6 months old sitting up and smiling. The message said Jackson was asking for his stepmommy, which a lie since babies that age don't talk, but it still made my stomach turn. I screenshotted everything and forwarded it to Graham, then blocked the number without responding, because any reaction would just encourage more harassment. A month passed, and I had to walk past our old street to get to the pharmacy for my anxiety medication that I'd finally admitted I needed. I could see the house from the sidewalk, and there were yellow curtains in what used to be my office window with baby decorations visible from the street. Lisa's car was in the driveway with a baby on board sticker, and new landscaping in the front yard where my garden used to be. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, feeling this hollow ache in my chest, then kept walking, because that life was gone, and standing there wouldn't bring it back. 6 months after that horrible morning when Ben told me about Jackson, I sat at the tiny kitchen table in my studio apartment with my laptop open to a budget spreadsheet. The divorce would be final in 3 weeks, and Graham said I'd get at least $40,000 in the settlement between the fraud claim and splitting remaining assets. I calculated how much I could save each month if I kept living cheap, and figured within 2 years I could have enough for a down payment on a small condo. My life wasn't what I'd planned when Ben and I picked out that house on Maple Street, but I was making it work on my own terms without anyone lying to me or stealing from me or pretending to love me while betraying me. Well, folks, that's all from me today. Appreciate you sticking around while I poked at all these curious details. Catch you in the next one. Subscribe for more content like this.